The airport was lit in soft morning haze, its glass walls reflecting a quiet city, still half asleep. John stood near gate 18B, with a cup of untouched coffee in one hand, his passport in the other, and an envelope in his jacket pocket, creased at the corners from being opened and resealed too many times. Though it had never been mailed, a family of tourists laughed near the charging station. A child ran past him, dragging a stuffed rabbit. Across the floor, behind him, an arrivals board, updated, with a soft click. But he wasn't really there. On his phone screen, Laurent heiress marries childhood love in private garden ceremony. The photo beneath it showed Sophia smiling with a bouquet in her hands. Julian No. Smith now stood beside her, in a pale linen suit, his hand resting on her lower back, as though it had always belonged there. John tapped the screen once. The image disappeared. Boarding for Nairobi was announced. Rows of passengers began to shuffle forward with sleepy eyes and heavy bags. John waited until the crowd thinned. Then, slowly, he walked to the recycling bin near the glass wall, pulled out the sealed letter addressed in his own handwriting, to Sophia, and dropped it in. No drama, no tears, no cinematic silence. Just one final gesture, for no one to witness, as the scanner beeped, and the attendant nodded him through. A news update played faintly from the screen above, a blurry shot of white roses and champagne flutes. Sophia's voice, barely audible in the background, as she toasted. John didn't look up. He stepped through the jet bridge with nothing but a laptop, a stethoscope, and a signed contract from an overseas field hospital. No luggage. No last-minute regrets. No one chasing after him. At 32, he had been a husband by obligation, a shadow by routine, a memory by choice. He took a window seat, closed his eyes, and breathed. Somewhere in the same city, the woman he married was being kissed beneath an arch of peonies. Guests applauded, cameras flashed, but in a different sky, on a different flight. John was already gone. John never really belonged to anyone. When he was 10, his parents died in a fire started by faulty wiring in a rundown rental they could barely afford. The insurance payout was small. His relatives, smaller. He was passed between second cousins until finally, at age 12, he landed in the Laurent household. It was Sophia's father, Robert Laurent, who made the final call. "Let the boy stay," he had said, after watching John quietly fix the hinge of a broken cabinet without being asked. He liked discipline. He liked gratitude. John had both in abundance. Sophia was 15 then, already tall, already graceful, already the kind of girl teachers bragged about at dinners. She barely noticed the quiet boy unpacking his few belongings into the far guest room. But the first time she saw him reading in the solarium alone, she had tilted her head and asked, "Do you always sit that still?" He had looked up, startled, and nodded once. That was how it began. Not love, not friendship, just proximity. The Laurent estate was vast, but the corners they both occupied often overlapped. Libraries, early morning gardens, silent breakfasts. John was always quiet, always helpful, always invisible, unless needed. And Sophia was always polite, always brilliant, always exactly who she was raised to be, at 19. She took her father's place on the Laurent Pharmaceuticals board as his health declined. By 23, she was running the company, and when whispers began swirling of succession and legal ownership, a clause in her father's will emerged. It stated clearly, control of the majority shares would only be transferred upon marriage. The press speculated wildly about who the groom would be, some investor's son, perhaps, or an ambitious young partner. But it was John. No headlines had predicted that to the world. It was a surprising love story. Childhood connection. Loyalty turned romance. John, the adopted son who rose from hardship, Sophia the heiress, who chose with her heart. It made for easy magazine covers and glowing social headlines. But inside the house, there were no such illusions. John and Sophia didn't date. They didn't confess. They signed. There were no rings exchanged that first month. Just paperwork, breakfast on opposite ends of the table, and polite nods between separate cars. Yet John never resented her. Could he? He was the one who said yes. She had approached him formally, years after they'd grown distant. She said, "You don't have to say yes," he had answered. "I already did. When I moved in." She had paused, unsure if he was joking. He wasn't. He thought maybe this was his way of repaying them. Maybe by helping her hold on to the company, he was finally balancing the scales. For everything he'd received. For every room he'd been allowed to stay in. For every time he'd been told, "You owe us." And so, they married. He moved into her wing of the penthouse. She kept her calendar filled with investor calls and press appearances. He stayed in the labs researching, experimenting. Publishing their life together was a performance. But John played his part well, and then came Smith. He had once been Julian Harterboy, who lived 2 houses down during Sophia's prep school years. The boy who threw stones at her window to escape his father's shouting. The boy she swore she would marry one day. He had left at 17 with his disgraced family when a fraud scandal wiped out their name. For a decade, he vanished into the wind. And then, one evening, Sophia returned from a board meeting, different. She didn't smile, but she wore red lipstick for the first time in years. John didn't ask why. He didn't ask why her eyes lingered on her phone longer than usual. Why she kept forgetting their joint appearances. Why she began skipping family dinners. He knew. But Sophia was not cruel. She never insulted John. Never yelled. She still brought him his favorite coffee during late nights in the lab. Still asked if he had eaten. Still answered kindly when he spoke. Only now, her kindness felt like guilt, and guilt was much harder to bear than silence. When the first photo surfaced, Sophia and Smith at an art gallery in the city, standing a little too close, her hand grazing his wrist, John saw it on the news before anyone told him. He stared at the image for a long time, until the room around him felt too small to breathe in. He didn't confront her. That wasn't the man he was. He simply began disappearing. Coming home later. Leaving before sunrise. Sleeping in the lab. Under dim desk lights. Telling no one. And then, one night, he came home to find an envelope on the counter. It wasn't addressed, but it didn't need to be. Inside was her wedding invitation to someone else. It had no explanation, no apology, just a name, a date, a location, and a note clipped to the bottom. "I'm sorry for everything, Sophia." John folded it quietly and set it aside. By dawn, he had emailed his resignation letter, donated most of his wardrobe, and signed up for a year-long placement with a non-profit medical team overseas. It was the only promise he'd ever made to himself. If she ever left him, he wouldn't beg. He wouldn't make a scene, he would simply leave, and he did. On the day she wore white again, John wore a plain linen shirt, pressed his boarding pass to the scanner, and walked into a different kind of beginning. It started with a cancelled dinner. Sophia had sent a brief message, "Board ran late. Eat without me." John didn't question it. He rarely did. He ate alone, like he had many times before, and returned to his lab notes under dim kitchen lights. But that night, her perfume still lingered in the entryway, stronger than usual. She hadn't been at the office. She just didn't want to be home. The second clue came a few days later. A driver John didn't recognize pulled into the circular driveway. Sophia stepped out of the back seat, in a black coat and red heels clothing, too elegant for anything her calendar had scheduled. She paused when she saw him through the window, then smiled faintly, and waved. Like nothing was wrong. John didn't wave back. Rumors bloomed fast. A junior associate mentioned seeing Ms. Laurent with someone at the opera. Someone tall, sharp-jawed, familiar. John said nothing. By the end of that week, even the boardroom whispers reached him. Julian Hartnell Smith had returned, rebranded. Rich, again. Rumor had it, he was backed by a silent investor from overseas. His startup was gaining traction. And he had been seen with Sophia more than once. John kept working, quiet, methodical, but inside. Something bent. That Sunday morning, he stood in the hallway watching her curl her hair in the mirror. "You're dressing up." Sophia glanced back through the reflection. "Gala, it's on your calendar too." He hadn't noticed. "You don't have to come if you're tired," she added, already fastening a diamond clasp at her neck. John's voice was soft. "Will he be there?" She froze for half a second, just half, then turned smoothly, lips pulling into a perfect smile. "Who?" John didn't answer. He just walked away. At the gala, the hall was warm with golden lights and murmured laughter. John arrived late, blending into a wall of suits and satin. He kept a glass of water in his hand, untouched. He watched her from a distance. Sophia floated through the crowd, her presence magnetic. She was always good at this, knowing exactly when to laugh, when to nod, how to own a room without needing to speak above a whisper. And then Smith arrived. He stepped into the hall like he owned it. Dressed in tailored grey, his hand slipping around Sophia's waist like it belonged there. She didn't stop him. She didn't move away. She leaned into it. Just enough for everyone to see. John's glass stayed steady in his hand. Not a ripple. He didn't approach them. Didn't cause a scene. Just stood for a moment still, unreadable, watching the couple that once could have been. Then quietly he left. No one noticed him walking out, not even her. "You're not divorcing him." That was the first thing Robert Lawrence said after the gala. His voice didn't rise. It never did. But the weight behind his words was final. Like a signature already inked. Sophia sat across from him in the family study. Her chin raised, but her knuckles white where they clenched her skirt. Sandra, her mother, watched from the armrest, silent, unreadable. "Dad, end it with Smith," he said today. Sophia blinked slowly, searching her father's face for any hint of softness. There was none. "John has kept this company's image spotless for 5 years. He's loyal, quiet, professional. And thanks to your foolish display last night, our stock fell 2 points by morning. Do you understand what you've done?" She didn't reply. Her silence was answer enough. "You're not walking out of this marriage," he said again. "Not after everything he's given up for you." Later that night, Sophia stood outside the penthouse balcony, the wind tossing her hair round her face. John's side of the apartment was dark. She hadn't seen him in 3 days. She told herself she didn't care, but every time she looked at the empty chair across the kitchen counter, something in her stomach twisted downstairs. John stood beneath the solitary light of the parking garage, his car keys dangling from one hand. He hadn't driven anywhere. Just stood there, as if the air was clearer underground. The past few weeks had felt like drowning. Underwater without flailing, just numb pressure pressing down on him. He hadn't replied to any of Sophia's messages. Not even the one that read, "Can we talk?" He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to beg. But he didn't know how to leave, either. That same night, an old email surfaced in his inbox, a newsletter from a medical non-profit he'd signed up 4 years ago and forgotten about. The subject line read, "We're heading back to Nairobi. We need field researchers." He clicked on it. Didn't delete it. Didn't ignore it either. That was how the idea began. Small, quiet. Familiar. Back in university, he used to talk about it with someone else. Not Sophia. Her name was Clara. She had been 2 years ahead of him. Kind, always sunburnt, from field rotations. She used to tease him about how his handwriting was too neat for a future trauma doctor. You're going to be the first guy who labels his scalpels by size. She had joked once. They had lost touch after she joined Doctors Without Borders. But the night after the gala, John found her online profile again. She was stationed in a desert region now, but her old posts were still visible. Smiling kids, broken clinics, dust and warmth, and honest work. And in all of them, Clara had the same tired but steady eyes, he remembered. He didn't message her, not right away. The next morning, Sophia returned to the penthouse to find it perfectly clean. Fridge restocked, the laundry folded, but the study door was locked. She pressed her ear to it, and heard nothing. Then her gaze drifted to the spare bedroom. A sliver of light glowed under the door. John was home, but not really. For the next few days, they moved like ghosts around each other. He left early, returned late. She hovered in the kitchen longer than usual, just to see if he'd pass through. He didn't. On the 4th day, she found an open document left on the printer tray. Medical clearance, overseas deployment. Her fingers hesitated on the edge. The form had his name, his ID number, his blood type. She placed it back without a word. That night, she made his favorite tea and left it by his bedroom door. He didn't touch it. The tea cooled, untouched. And outside the window, it began to rain. When John opened the application portal for the NGO, the first thing he saw was a familiar name on the staff directory, Clara Wong. Lead Coordinator, Sub-Saharan Unit. On impulse, he sent a message. It's been a long time. I'm not sure if you even remember, Medjon Lin, med school. I saw you're still with DWB. I'm thinking of applying. Not sure where I'd fit in. Would love to hear your thoughts. She replied 2 hours later. Of course. I remember you. Neat handwriting. Remember, apply. We need quiet people more than you think. He didn't know why her message hit him so hard. Maybe it was the warmth. Maybe it was the fact that she didn't ask. Why he was suddenly interested again, after all. These years, maybe it was because she didn't bring up Sophia. By the end of the week, he had submitted his application. Sophia knew she didn't say anything, but she started knocking on his door in the evenings. Once, she asked if he wanted to watch an old film they used to play for the shareholders' kids during winter galas. Another time, she offered to help with travel arrangements, as if she were just a secretary coordinating logistics. He nodded, said thank you. Nothing more. And that distance, those polite exchanges, cut deeper than arguments ever could. John had always imagined that leaving would involve some grand confrontation, but it didn't. It felt like a house, quietly emptying. Room by room. Memory by memory. On the day his approval letter came in, he opened the email and stared at the words. Deployment begins June 14th. Please confirm. He packed that night, only the essentials. Books, a stethoscope, a scarf his mentor had once gifted him, and the wedding photo Sophia had framed years ago still untouched. Buried in the back of the closet. He held it for a moment, his thumb brushing over the edge. Then he laid it on the counter, when Sophia found it the next morning. The glass had fogged with the imprint of his touch. She sat down and held the frame against her chest. Unable to explain the strange hollowness in her lungs, she was supposed to be relieved, freed. This was what she wanted, but somehow, it already felt like a memory. Somehow, it already felt like regret. The air in Kisumu was thick with heat, medicine, and distant thunderclouds. In the crowded clinic tent, John wore gloves, damp with sweat, sleeves rolled up, forehead streaked with dust. A young boy lay unconscious on the cot before him, dehydration already turning his lips pale. "Saline now," he said quietly to the nurse beside him. Clara handed him the IV without a word. The clinic was chaos, overcrowded, understocked, but, in the noise, John felt strangely clear. Like every small act here had weight, purpose. No staged smiles, no photo ops, no name plaques, just the raw pulse of real life. The child stirred faintly as the drip began to work. John exhaled, steady, present. He hadn't checked the news in days. Back home, Sophia had begun drawing up quiet legal papers. No courtroom battle, no bitter back and forth. Her lawyers crafted it perfectly. A clean separation, confidentiality ensured, estate divisions precise. On paper, it would look mutual, calm, almost amicable. She didn't want a mess. Not while expecting, because now, she was carrying Julian's child. Or so she believed. She hadn't told her family, not yet. Only Smith knew. And he had smiled when she said the words. Kissed her forehead with just enough warmth to seem sincere. But something about his embrace felt ... off. He never asked to see the sonogram. Never mentioned names. Never spoke of the future beyond red carpet appearances and startup interviews. She told herself it was just nerves, just timing. Then one morning she opened her phone to chaos, tabloid headlines, screaming in bold, "Julian, Hart's hidden fiancé revealed while dating Laurent heiress." Photos, voice notes, leaked texts. A woman, an influencer from New York, had come forward with a 6-month timeline, full of proof, dinner receipts, vacation pictures, a hotel registry that overlapped exactly with a weekend Julian claimed he had been pitching investors. Sophia's face was everywhere, eyes blurred. Bump barely visible under her coat. Julian didn't deny it. In fact, he disappeared. His number disconnected. His publicist declined comment. And just like that, the man she had risked everything for evaporated, and Daniel gone, not just physically, but unreachable. No statements. No return calls. No reaction, because halfway across the world, John was threading a suture through torn flesh beneath a canvas roof, unaware of the headlines breaking thousands of miles away. When the local clinic manager handed him a satellite printout, days later, his name circled beneath the fold, he skimmed it without expression. Laurent heiress left in scandal's wake, ex-husband silent abroad. He folded the paper, placed it on a stack of worn reports, said nothing. That evening, as the sun bled out behind red dust plains, Clara sat beside him outside the tent. "She hurt you?" John didn't look up. "I don't mean Sophie," she added. "I mean the part of you that stayed. The one that kept hoping." He finally said, "There's a difference between forgiveness and forgetting." She nodded. "But sometimes leaving is the only way to remember who you are." He didn't reply. Back in the city, Sophia's world began to collapse inward. News vans loitered outside her office. Shareholders requested emergency calls. Her PR team scrambled to distance her from Julian's name. But the public, so quick to crown her a romantic heroine now, had sharper words. Homewrecker, naive, power-hungry heiress, fooled by a bitter. The worst of it wasn't the shame, it was the silence. From Daniel, he didn't call. Didn't ask if she was okay. Didn't send one word of acknowledgement. The letter she had once written him never sent still sat in her drawer. She opened it now and read the first line. "I never knew what love looked like until I lost it." Her fingers shook, because now she realized what she had done wasn't just betrayal, it was abandonment. And for the first time in months, she whispered his name, not to an audience, not to a lawyer, not to her reflection, but to the empty air, as if maybe, somewhere under a foreign sun, he'd hear it. The office was colder than John remembered. Same polished floors. Same minimalist paintings his father-in-law had selected years ago meant to project stability. The walls still smelled faintly of lavender diffusion, as though someone had sprayed them just before he arrived. He stood near the reception desk with his hands in his coat pockets, glancing at the meeting room door ahead. Through the frosted glass, he could just make out her silhouette, Sophia. He hadn't seen her in nearly 6 months. Not since he left the country. Not since the tabloid storm. Not since the child she was carrying changed from a quiet secret to a viral headline. She was waiting for him now. Not for a reunion. Not for forgiveness. Just for the final signature. He could have sent the forms by courier. He could have authorized his lawyer remotely. But he didn't single quotes. He came in person. When the assistant opened the door, Sophia stood up from the long glass table. Her hair was tied back, in a low twist. No jewelry. No makeup. Just a pale blue blouse. And hands gently folded in front of her. She looked almost ordinary. And maybe for the first time. "Real John," she said softly. He offered a small nod. Sophia, they sat down. The lawyer wasn't present by her request, I thought. She began, voice trembling. "If there was even the smallest chance we could speak before everything's official, I wanted that." He didn't reply. She reached into her folder, pulling out a photo. It was an ultrasound. Grainy, barely distinguishable. "The baby's due in 3 months." He studied the image for a second, then placed it back down without touching it. "Not mine," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," she answered. "But it was never about hiding that from you. I just, didn't know how to tell you when everything was already broken." John looked at her. "You knew the moment you brought him to the gala." Her breath caught. "I didn't think it would go that far," she whispered. "I thought I was making the right choice. I thought love was supposed to be like in stories, loud, reckless. But you were always quiet. And I mistook quiet for absence." He looked away. "You never fought me," she said. "Even when you knew. You never yelled. Never asked me to stay. Why?" He turned back to her, gaze calm, voice low. "Because love isn't supposed to beg." Sophia's eyes brimmed with tears. "He's gone, John. He lied to me, used me. I thought we were building a future, and all he was doing was taking my name and selling it. And now," her voice broke, "now I'm here, and you're the only person who never asked for anything from me but truth. I didn't see that until it was too late." Silence. John's fingers rested gently on the divorce papers. He flipped through them without rush. Read every clause, every condition. The settlement. The privacy clause, the division of property. Then he placed the pen beside the final signature line. "Do you hate me?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "No. Do you still love me?" Was quiet. Then, "I loved the version of you who wanted the same life I did. Who laughed at my burnt coffee and folded my notes when I worked too late. I loved the woman who held my hand when no one else saw, but she left a long time ago." Sophia wiped her cheek. "I've changed," he nodded. "So have I." She reached forward slowly. Not to touch him, but to bridge something invisible between them. "I don't want to lose what we had." "You already did." Tears spilled freely now. "So this is it." "I wish you peace," John said gently. "But my love for you ended the day I chose myself," and with that, he signed. The scratch of the pen against the paper was the only sound in the room. Sophia pressed a hand to her lips, as if to hold in the sob, threatening to escape. Her shoulders shook, but she didn't beg. Not anymore. That too was gone. John rose slowly, gathered his coat, and walked toward the door. Halfway there, he paused. "I leave tomorrow," he said without turning back. "South Sudan, this time. Cholera outbreak." Her voice was soft, hoarse. "Will I ever see you again?" A beat passed. Then, "I hope not." He left. The hallway swallowed him in quiet footsteps. Back inside, Sophia sat alone, the signature ink still drying on the papers before her. For the first time in her life, she had everything she thought she wanted: freedom, fame, a child on the way, and yet, the only thing that remained was silence. Because love doesn't leave in flames, it fades in the space between what's said and what's never said again. The sun in Dhaka was different. Less hostile than Nairobi's, less dry than Sudan's. Here it kissed the streets in gold and warmed the ocean air until even the breeze felt like a bomb. Daniel No longer Chairman Liu or Mr. Laurent, was simply Dr. John Linnigan. He stood on the edge of a pop-up clinic, beneath a wide awning, as schoolchildren lined up with makeshift cards in their hands. Their laughter mingled with the shouts of vendors nearby and the low hum of waves beyond the hill. He adjusted a little girl's arm sling and smiled when she shyly whispered thank you. Behind him, Iris was sorting out supplies under a fan that worked only when it felt like it. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, hair tied back, scrubs streaked with dust and sunlight. There was a smear of gauze tape across her temple, evidence of a clumsy ceiling tiling she was laughing about. It with the local nurse, as if nothing had happened. John watched her for a moment. There was no fanfare between them. No declarations. Just glances that lingered a second too long. Conversations that always stretched past curfews. Hands brushing during inventory checks. Smiles that waited until the other looked up. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't even love yet, but it was something better. It was steady. The kind of thing built, not on fantasy, but on knowing who someone is when no one is watching. Iris never asked about his past. Not directly, she didn't need to. She saw it in the way he hesitated before unlocking his phone. The way he looked out windows too long. The way he always let others speak first. She noticed the scar on his left wrist one morning while they were both carrying crates to the van, a tiny, faded curve, barely visible. The kind you only catch when the light hits it right. Sophia used to call it his comet. She'd once traced it with her finger, and joked it made him look fragile. Back when teasing was the closest they got to affection, but Iris said nothing. She just placed her hand around his the way you might hold something not broken, but bruised from too many years of hiding. He didn't pull away. That evening, the two of them sat on the clinic roof, eating instant noodles from cracked cups. The city buzzed below them, alive with music and headlights. "Do you miss it?" she asked. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "No," she looked at him from the corner of her eye. "That's the first time you've answered that, without a pause." He gave a small smile. "That's the first time I meant it." She nodded and returned to her noodles. He took a deep breath. "No souvenirs," he said after a moment. "Not even a ring." She didn't look up. "Good. Those things weigh too much in your pocket." He laughed softly. "That a medical opinion? It's a survival one." Silence fell between them again. Not awkward. Just full. He leaned back on his elbows, watching the stars emerge one by one. Somewhere far away, his name still lived in a few shareholder archives. In a few scandal articles that had already begun to fade. Sophia had remarried quietly. He'd heard through a forwarded email from a mutual acquaintance. He didn't click the link. He didn't need to. Some endings were better left unopened. The next day he walked through the clinic with Iris, as they mapped out the week's outreach points. Kids ran around them. A few stray goats wandered too close to the tent. And one elderly patient refused treatment unless Iris administered it personally. Because your hands are warmer, he insisted, as the sun dipped low, casting long amber shadows on the dirt. John stood at the edge of the clinic again. This time, Iris stood beside him. She handed him a bottle of water, her fingers brushing his. He didn't move away. Instead, he looked down at her hand. Strong, calloused, real. He took it. No ceremony, no promises, no expectations, just one scarred hand, meeting another in the quiet promise of beginning again. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet for a Friday evening. In the Laurent household, Sophie sat curled on the edge of the couch, the television casting faint light across her face. On the screen, a CNN segment played in muted tones. Health Summit in Nairobi. Global medical innovators honored. And there he was, John, standing beside dignitaries. A light blue pin on his lapel, sleeves rolled up, as he smiled modestly during applause. He didn't wave, didn't posture, just bowed slightly, hands folded, as someone announced the creation of a mobile field unit, named in his honor. The camera zoomed in on his face. He looked older now. Not by age, but by peace. Sophie exhaled slowly, fingers clutching a creased photograph in her lap. It was an old print, edges curled with time. A picture from a different world. She was in a wedding gown, blurry in the background, just behind Daniel, his profile in focus, as he signed a guest book. He wasn't smiling in the photo. He never did in those days, not fully. Beside her, a soft whimper broke the silence. The child, Julian's child, rolled over in his sleep, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. Sophie gently tucked the blanket around his shoulders and pressed a kiss to his forehead. She returned to the couch and turned the TV off. The silence that followed wasn't cruel. It was just final. She stared at the photo again, then whispered, barely audible, "He really did leave." Her lips trembled, but no sob escaped. Just a single tear. And then, stillness. Thousands of miles away. Under a sky brimming with dust and dusk, John zipped up his duffel bag in the dim light of the clinic hallway. The hum of the ceiling fan above him stuttered and clacked. Outside, the sound of a motorcycle buzzed down the dirt road toward the next village. He reached for a notebook when something fluttered to the ground. A letter. The edges were worn. Still sealed. Her name written across the front in his old handwriting. He crouched, picked it up, and turned it in his hand slowly. For a moment, his thumb hovered over the seal, just a flick, and he could unfold the ghost of everything they never said. But he didn't sing, he smiled. A faint, quiet thing. Then walked out to the riverbank behind the clinic. He stood there for a moment. The wind shifted slightly, tugging at the hem of his shirt. Then he let go. The letter slipped from his hand and drifted into the water. It floated. Briefly. Caught in a bend of reeds, then vanished downstream without resistance. John watched until it disappeared. No final message, no closure needed, just water, sky, and the sound of moving on.